Welcome back, everybody. Today, we're going deep with a musician you might not know by name, but whose music, well, you felt it, even if you don't realize it. Louis Moreau Gottschalk, 19th century, but man, this guy was ahead of his time.
Ahead of his time is putting it lightly. Visionary, innovator, and I'd even argue one of the missing links between classical and what we know as jazz today.
That's a bold claim. So where do we even begin with a life like that?
The beginning, like always, is a good place to start. And with Gottschalk, it's not just where he was born, but when. 1829, New Orleans. Imagine the sounds of that city back then.
Oh, I'm trying. We're talking pre-Civil War, right?
Yeah.
So a mix of European and what else was in that? Gumbo.
Gumbo is the perfect word. You'd have your formal European opera houses, sure, but then on any street corner, Afro-Caribbean rhythms, dances. And in Gottschalk's own family, his grandmother, his governess, they were from Santo Domingo. He wasn't just hearing this music, he was living it.
Okay, so that's the backdrop. But this guy wasn't just some kid soaking it all in passively, right? We're talking prodigy-level talent here.
Prodigy is an understatement. Think about this first public concert at 11 years old. 12 years old, he's shipped off to Paris to study.
Hold on, 12. Was Europe even ready for what this kid was bringing?
They were about to get schooled in the best way possible. Imagine, here comes this young man, already technically gifted, but with a flair, a rhythm that no one in those stuffy European conservatories had encountered before.
I bet that ruffled some feathers. But he impressed Chopin, didn't he? And wasn't there something about Berlioz being a fan?
You're doing your homework. Chopin was impressed, absolutely. And yes, the Berlioz of Symphonie Fantastique fame.
No way, that's a big deal.
It was. Even Berlioz, a master of dramatic composition, was captivated, called Gottschalk the poet of the piano for his ability to evoke such emotion, such storytelling, just through playing.
High praise from a guy who knew a thing or two about musical drama. But for me, it's Gottschalk's time in Cuba that really sparks my curiosity. 1854, he arrives in Havana. And boom, instant rock star status. What was it about Cuba that clicked so strongly for him?
More than just clicking, it was like the final ingredient, you know? He had this base of Caribbean influence already, but in Cuba, he connects with masters like Nicolás Ruiz Espadero, Manuel Somel.
I've heard those names. They were big in Cuban music back then, right?
Huge. And they weren't just influencing Gottschalk, it was a two-way street. These guys were bouncing ideas off each other, pushing the boundaries of what Cuban music could be.
So it's in Cuba that we see Gottschalk really merging that classical training with, I guess we could call it Afro-Cuban flair. But this wasn't just him messing around. There was a purpose to it.
Oh yeah, Gottschalk wasn't just incorporating, he was on a mission. He gets fascinated by the habanera, this dance form with French and African roots.
Describe that for folks who aren't familiar. What's the habanera vibe? What caught Gottschalk's ear?
Close your eyes, imagine a slow, swaying kind of rhythm. Like this expert speaker taps a rhythm. There's this syncopation to it, a subtle shift in the emphasis that gives it a distinct feel. Gottschalk heard that, and it was like a light bulb. He saw the potential not just for dance music, but for something totally new.
So he's taking this rhythmic idea from the habanera, weaving it into his already classically trained compositions. Was anyone else doing this at the time?
Not a chance. This was radical stuff. Gottschalk was bridging two musical worlds that back then were considered totally separate. And looking back, you can hear the seeds of what would become ragtime early jazz.
Whoa, hold up. You're saying we can hear hints of jazz in Gottschalk's work? I got to hear this. Give me an example, like El Cocoyer, one of his famous pieces with a Caribbean vibe.
El Cocoyer is a perfect example. You've got those habanera rhythms in there, but they're transformed through Gottschalk's incredible piano technique.
Yeah.
It's not a simple copy-paste. It's like a conversation between European and Afro-Cuban traditions happening in the music itself.
Man, I can practically hear the culture clash, note by note. This wasn't borrowing. It was like a whole new musical language being born.
And that's what makes Gottschalk revolutionary. He didn't just blur the lines, he erased them, experimenting with sound and style in ways that nobody, and I mean nobody, had dared to before.
We've mentioned El Cocoyer, but there's also Mariela O Le Bananier, all showing this signature Gottschalk blend.
And it wasn't just limited to these big formal pieces. Gottschalk was deliberate about bringing in folk traditions into his work. Like, he travels to Puerto Rico, gets inspired by their Aguinaldo music, and boom, he composes Marcha de los Jíbaros right then and there.
So he wasn't just performing. He was absorbing, adapting, transforming musical ideas from everywhere he went. like a musical sponge, soaking it all up and squeezing out something totally new.
That is a great analogy, and this drive to push boundaries, it didn't stop with his compositions.
Oh, I have a feeling you're about to tell me about his legendary concerts. Because now we're stepping into the realm of the truly spectacular, right?
Gottschalk's concerts, they weren't just, sit-down, polite applause kind of affairs. These were events, spectacles. He got that music could be a whole experience, visual, emotional, everything.
I've read about these concerts, and honestly, it's like he invented the concept of a rock concert 100 years early. But was it all just for show? Or was there a deeper purpose behind all the grandeur?
Oh, it was deeper than just showing off. That much is certain. At Gottschalk, he believed that music, the right music, could break down barriers between people, between cultures even. And these huge, elaborate concerts with the mix of sounds, the visuals, that was his way of making that connection happen, but on a massive scale.
Okay, I can see that. But we got to talk specifics. Like the Havana concert in 1861, an orchestra of 40 pianos, all playing his symphony Una Noche en el Trópico, 40 pianos. What was the audience's reaction to something that audacious?
I mean, can you imagine being there? The sheer power of it all, 40 pianos going at it, then breaking into these intricate harmonies. It must have been mind-blowing. It wasn't just about Gottschalk's skill. It was a statement about what music was capable of.
I'm trying to picture it. The logistics alone are boggling my mind. Were the pianos arranged in some specific way? Was there a conductor? Did they even all fit on the same stage?
Sadly, those details are lost to time. But just think about the visual rows and rows of these gleaming pianos, each with a talented musician ready to bring Gottschalk's sound to life.
It's like a scene out of some epic movie.
Ah.
But his ambition didn't stop there, did it? Wasn't there that concert in Chile a few years later, equally over the top?
Ah, yes, the 1865 concert. Now, that one shows you Gottschalk's range. He brought together 80 double basses, 80 wind instruments, plus 45 drums from the Chilean army band.
That's a lot of bass.
Yeah.
And a wild mix of instruments. It seems like a totally different approach from the 40 piano spectacle. What was he aiming for with that one?
It tells you he was versatile, that he wasn't afraid to experiment. Tradition, convention, that wasn't Gottschalk. He was all about finding new ways to get his music out there, to push the limits of what people thought music could be.
Almost like he was saying, screw the rule book. Let's see what happens when we throw all this together and let it rip.
Exactly. And this kind of leads us to his final concert, the one that, well, tragically cut his career short.
You're talking about the Rio de Janeiro concert in 1869, right? It was supposed to be his biggest, most ambitious project yet.
Imagine this, an orchestra of 650 musicians, plus 100 percussionists. It was like a symphony on a scale no one had ever attempted before, all gathered there in Rio, ready to perform under Gottschalk's direction. The energy, the excitement in that hall must have been incredible.
It's really sad to think he never got to see it through, to be struck down by yellow fever right when he was at the peak of his creativity.
A huge loss for the music world, no doubt. But even in his short life, what Gottschalk achieved, the mark he left, that's undeniable.
All right, so we've gone from his upbringing, his musical innovations, these crazy concerts. But what about the lasting impact? How is Gottschalk remembered today, besides the spectacle?
It's multi-layered, his influence. First off, he's a pioneer in blending European and Latin American musical traditions. Didn't just borrow, he fused them, made something new.
He was a musical ambassador, in a way, and we touched on this earlier, but his impact on the development of ragtime and jazz, that's huge.
Absolutely. Those syncopated rhythms he loved, the improvisation he snuck in, those became key parts of these genres that exploded later on. Think of Scott Joplin's piano rags or Jelly Roll Morton's early jazz. It all echoes what Gottschalk was already doing.
Mind-blowing to think his music, written over 150 years ago, is still relevant, still influencing artists today. Any modern-day examples come to mind, people carrying on the Gottschalk torch?
Guys like Marco Rizzo, Chucho Valdez. They're amazing pianists, and both have talked about how Gottschalk inspired their work, that mix of classical and Afro-Cuban. It's still fresh, still powerful.
Proof that great music really does transcend time and place. But I wonder, was his genius instantly recognized back in the day?
Funny you should ask, because he actually faced a lot of pushback, especially in his own country. Some critics thought his work was too out there, too different from what they considered proper classical music.
Classic case of a prophet is never recognized in his own land, right? So if America wasn't ready for him, who was? Who embraced his sound?
It was the rest of the world that really got him. Latin America, they welcomed him with open arms. And Europe, even with all their classical tradition, they were captivated by his fresh approach.
It makes you wonder how his music would have evolved if he'd lived longer, had more time to experiment. What other musical landscapes could he have explored?
That's the big what if, isn't it? But what we know for sure is that Gottschalk's story is about the power of music to change things. His willingness to embrace different influences, to challenge the rules, that's what made him so unique, so inspiring.
So we've gone from New Orleans all the way to Rio and back, heard stories of this musician who, honestly, breaks all the molds. What's the big takeaway here? Why should our listener care about this guy, Moreau Gottschalk?
Because his story tells us something important, I think. That the best stuff, the real breakthroughs, they happen when different worlds collide, you know? Gottschalk, he wasn't scared to embrace what was different, to shake things up.
A true musical trailblazer. He could hear the music of the future way before anyone else. But it's more than just notes and rhythms, right? There's a bigger lesson here.
Absolutely. It's about curiosity, about being open to other cultures, other ways of thinking about music. That's what made Gottschalk so unique, so ahead of his time.
And that message, it's more important than ever today, don't you think? In a world that's so connected, so diverse, Gottschalk's story is almost like a roadmap.
Exactly. It's like he's saying, go out there, experience different things, find inspiration where you least expect it.
So for our listeners, the challenge is this. Go beyond your comfort zone, musically speaking. Explore something you've never heard before, and see if you can hear those echoes of Gottschalk's genius in today's music. I bet you'll be surprised what you find.
That's the magic of these deep dives, right? They open up whole new worlds to explore.
And who knows what other amazing stories we'll uncover in our next adventure. Until then, stay curious, folks. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of Moreau Gottschalk.